Don Lamb. He's a Boone County farmer. He's also the director of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, and he's been on the job for 1 year. In fact, it was this event last year that we introduced Don as the new director of ISDA. Don is here. Also, the gentleman who was the previous ISDA director, Bruce Kettler. He's now with us, and he is now the president and CEO of the Agribusiness Council of Indiana. He's with us. Courtney Kingery, she's a very busy woman. In fact, she has 3 different organizations that she leads. She's the CEO of the Indiana Soybean Alliance, also the Indiana Corn Marketing Council, and the Indiana Corn Growers Association. Representative Kendell Culp, he's a farmer from Jasper County, Indiana, northwestern Indiana, the Rensselaer area. He's the vice president of Indiana Farm Bureau, and as if that wasn't enough, he's a farmer by day. He's also a state representative by night. He's a representative, in fact, or by day. Maybe you farm by night, I don't know. He represents District 16 in northwestern Indiana. We'll talk about some state legislation. In fact, he and State Senator Gene Lysing and Frank Thompson, they raced here from the State House to be here just in time for dinner this evening. So we certainly thank you for coming. Last but not certainly least, the pride and joy of Purdue University. His name's not Zach Eady, but the next best thing. Dr. Micheal Langemeier. He's an associate professor, or you're a full-time professor? I'm full-time. He's full-time professor now. He's professor of agricultural economics at Purdue University, but he is the associate director of Purdue's Center for Commercial Agriculture. In fact, I want to start with you, and by the way, if any of you want to chime in, if you guys want to interrupt each other, talk over each other, feel free, because we're going to have just a casual conversation here, because the first thing I want to talk to you, Dr. Langemeier, is commodity prices. How many folks, by a round of applause, that's your number one concern going into this planting season, commodity prices? I would imagine if you take a look year over year, and Dr. Langemeier, I've got some notes here, compared to this same date last year. So March 6th last year, since March 6th, corn, the May contract has dropped by $2.11 a bushel. Wheat, the May contract in 1 year, that's dropped $1.77 a bushel. And soybeans, the May contract for soybeans, in the 1 year alone has fallen $3.69 a bushel. And you notice a little bit by little bit each and every, over the course of 1 year, that $3.69 certainly makes an impact. Dr. Langemeier, have we seen the bottom for these commodity prices?
That's a really tough question, so I'm going to kind of dodge that question a little bit and talk a little bit longer term in terms of what the bottom may be. Really, how long these prices stay where they're at really depends on the millions of acres of corn we plant this year. You know, last year we planted 94 million acres. If we plant 92 million plus again this year, corn prices are going to stay low for a long time. And of course the market is expecting something closer to 90 million acres. That would help, but we're sitting on a pile of corn. And so if you look at the long run price, you know, going out several years, we're looking at corn prices $4.50 to $4.75, about as far as the eye can see. That's better than where we're at right now, but it's certainly not anywhere close to what we were in the last couple of years.
Talk about some of the factors, Dr. Langemeier, that have led to commodity prices falling where they have.
Well, the rest of the world continues to grow corn and soybeans. Why? It's been very profitable. If you look at the profitability of growing soybeans and corn in Brazil, been very profitable the last 5 years, and so they continue to increase acreage there. The same with some other parts of the world, and so we've built up the factory, if you will. The factory's running at capacity, and we're sitting on a lot of corn. But this is self-correcting. You know, certainly if we reduce acreage in the United States, that'll help. And right now, if you look at the soybean to corn price ratio, it does favor soybeans. That's particularly important for the Western Corn Belt, where they plant more continuous corn. And so it's going to take a while, but we'll work our way through this big supply.
I want to ask both Representative Culp and Director Don Lamb, because you both have your own farm operations. I know, Courtney, your family farms in White County. But what are your concerns going into this planting season that you folks have concerning commodity prices, also input prices? We've seen them dip a little bit lower, but what concerns, and I'll start with you, Don, what concerns do you have for your farm operation concerning commodity prices, inputs, that sort of thing?
Well, it is the commodity prices. Is this on, right? Yep. Commodity prices are the biggest concern we would have, and it's ironic. I think my banker's here tonight, and I think that meeting was just this morning trying to lay that out. And that's one good thing about my job is I was in Indianapolis. My brother had to take care of that. So. But it is, it is a big deal. It really is. When you look at this year compared to the last, 3 years, really, and just what we've been able to do, and so it's a huge impact, and it makes you think about pulling back on most things, which affects everybody else in the room that's not a farmer too. If you're selling farm equipment or selling products to the farm, that will affect that because it will tighten things up considerably.
Kendell, your thoughts about commodity prices and how that will impact your farm operation here going into this planting season?
Well, in a bigger picture, certainly NP and K prices are lower, and that's a real positive thing. Unfortunately, as the commodity prices go down, you're going to have to look for ways to cut back. I think interest rates are a real concern as far as, Lon talked about his banker having to pay those interest rates as those continue to increase. If you're purchasing real estate, farmland prices are increasing. Gollies, I remember my first loan was in 1981. That got up to 16.25%. Some got higher. For me, that was a variable interest rate. I learned a lot on that. I've never done that again. But then we've come down for 40 years, and now we've hit bottom and we're coming back up. So I think interest rates are critical. We're gonna really we could have a kind of a separation within the ag industry on that. And then the other thing is workforce. Not any different than any other business, shortage of workforce. I can tell you that affected me personally just this weekend. So we sold 3 loads of hogs over the weekend, and yours truly got to power wash the hog barn because I couldn't find anybody else to do it. So it's actually farming by night for me and General Assembly during the day. So.
You mentioned that labor component because, Bruce, and I'll put you on the spot here because that's one thing that I know a lot of policy and a lot of ag leaders are pushing for a revision to existing H-2A visa laws that would change things up, and I know that that's something that you have received a lot of feedback from in your role with the Agribusiness Council of Indiana and talking to Indiana ag business owners and ag business leaders.
Yeah, that's right, CJ. And I mean, the first thing when I talk to our members, they talk about labor workforce. That's number one. And how do they address that and look at it? Some are looking at H-2A. That can be a little bit of a challenge because that's really intended to go to the farm, but there are ways that some of our members can figure that out and work on that. But it's not without its complications. It's a very complex, very complicated program. You need to have expertise figuring out how to first make the application correct because that determines everything of what those folks can do when they're working on a farm or working where they need to be. And if you deviate from that, you can get in trouble with the feds, and I mean there's all kinds of issues with that. One of the biggest challenges with that we hear from H-2A, I heard it when I was at ISDA, it's still a challenge here, is the prevailing wage rate on that and how that affects, because it's different. It can be different from state to state. So for example, I know in case of Kentucky, they've got a quite a bit lower rate that affects anybody that's hiring H-2A workers. So you've got to think about that. The one thing I will say from a labor standpoint, and I know we've got Ivy Tech here, one of our members has really done some work with them. Others are doing it, is trying to figure out how do we skill up the people that they need to operate equipment. Applicator's a good example. If you've not seen the simulator over here, I encourage you to do that. But trying to say, okay, we're going to figure out how to do it. Not everybody has to have a 4-year degree with the members that we have, but they can get very good, very strong, really good paying jobs with some expertise, but sometimes we need certification and training to make that happen. And so a lot of our members are saying, okay, we're going to figure out how to do that. We may need to invest in these people to make it happen, and that's a great example of a program that can happen very strongly, and our members are willing to do it because they need that good skilled labor.
I want to talk about policy and chat with you, Courtney, because you just came back. Of course, last week was Commodity Classic in Houston, Texas. A lot of folks who are here today were at that event last week. Courtney, you were there representing Indiana corn and soybean producers. And farm labor is certainly one policy that, a thing that's been discussed as far as policy. I know another thing, the farm bill, or lack thereof, another thing that's been on the minds of Indiana corn and soybean producers. Walk us through some of the policy discussions that you and your team had last week at Commodity Classic and those main concerns policy-wise for Indiana corn and soybean producers here today.
Yeah, thanks, CJ. Curious, raise your hand if you were at Commodity Classic last week. Some of you guys in the room, few of you in the room were, yeah. So Commodity Classic, as many of you know, it's the trade show for a lot to see the new seed, the new technology, the new equipment. In addition to that, American Soybean Association and National Corn Growers Association have their grassroots delegate session there. Kendell, in addition to being Farm Bureau, was also an American Soybean Association delegate and director for several years, and we've got some other directors here in the room as well. Mike Caney is a current, I don't know where Mike is. Mike Caney's a current ASA director. He's behind the panel. Mike Caney's a current ASA director. So those are those grassroots opportunities for the members to have and get in the national policy books. A couple areas that they talked about on the national corn grower side, year-round E15. So that's 15% ethanol. I know we've got some poet people here in the room as well. Over 40%, about 45% of the corn here in Indiana goes into that ethanol production, and then you get the DDGs coming out of it. Ethanol, E15, cannot be sold year-round because it doesn't meet the recipe for summer fuel. You guys know that there's a summer fuel blend. E15 doesn't meet that recipe for a summer fuel blend. So getting year-round E15 is incredibly important to us because, as you know, the fuel at 10%, if we can get that up to a 15% ethanol, vehicles since 2001 can run on E15. It's lower price at the pump, good for the environment, uses corn demand there. So getting year-round for E15 is incredibly important. There have been several Midwestern states that their governors petitioned to the EPA to allow year-round E15. Some of those Midwestern governors that did get approved. However, we tried to work with Governor Holcomb, and Governor Holcomb chose not to move forward on that front. So we're hoping that now that we've got some of the surrounding governors around and they have E15 year-round, that'll create an opportunity for us here in Indiana to be able to have that year-round E15 in the coming years. Sustainable aviation fuel, we talked about also the Farm Bill. We have commitment, we call them the four corners, so it's the House and Senate ag chairs, that they are going to get a farm bill through for us. I'm not holding my breath, but I will be cautiously optimistic. I will be cautiously optimistic, and we continue to work with their offices and the ag committees to have that go through. One of the big areas of debate, there's always a little bit of debate on the floor, right? You know this, Senator Leising, you know this, there's always a little bit of debate on the floor around base acre updates. So I'm going to pose the question. Here was the debate. Mandatory versus voluntary base acre updates. Who would be in favor of mandatory one-year base acre updates? Voluntary base acre updates. Yeah. There was a lot of debate on mandatory versus voluntary. If you think about some, especially the southern states, that maybe they're not growing tobacco anymore or as many peanuts as they once were. So there's a lot of debate on that, both on the corn and soybean side. So still a few points of the Farm Bill to hammer out, but good debate, good discussion by the ASA and NCGA delegates at that front at Commodity Classic.
I'm going to one by one ask each of you, going down the line, starting with you, Don. Farm Bill. Is the can going to get kicked down the road even further, or will we get a Farm Bill passed this year, Don?
No idea.
Bruce?
I too want to be optimistic, but I I think it's less than 50% chance it gets done this year.
Courtney,
I think next year.
Kendell.
I'm going to say next year. I think Senator Stabenow from Michigan would probably like to get that done as her last year as a senator, but politics always comes into play. And there is such a close division in the House of Representatives. Conventional wisdom says that's going to be controlled by Democrats. So there is no incentive for Democrats to try to agree to a farm bill this year. I think they'll make it next year so it can be their farm bill.
Dr. Langemeier.
It's not likely to be passed this year. Certainly an extension of the old farm bill is probably more likely.
I'm going to change my answer. I don't think it's going to happen this year.
All right. So there you have it. Well, a lot of folks may not know that 85% of the farm bill is nutrition. We're talking only 15%. Now, this farm bill, what's the estimate that, $1.4 billion? Or I'm sorry, $1.4 trillion for this farm bill. 15% going to agricultural needs. The other kendell, SNAP, WIC, what we used to call food stamps back in the day. So I think that's the major area. You mentioned, Kendell, Senator Stabenow, and she's saying, you know what, I'm not budging. 85%, I'm going to hold firm on that funding for SNAP. So we'll wait and see how that all plays out here over the next several months and into 2025. We talked about farmland prices a little bit earlier because how many folks, by a round of applause, that's another concern that you have. You're seeing surrounding farmland prices escalating, interest rate prices escalating. Is that another concern that a lot of folks here in the room have? I would imagine so, because Dr. Langemeier, according to your office, the Purdue Center for Commercial Agriculture, and this is numbers from 2023, just last year, the average price for quality farmland here in Indiana, if you can believe, $13,700 per acre. That is the going rate for, and once again, quality farmland, and roughly about $8,600 per acre for poor quality farmland. Do you see those prices, Dr. Langemeier, cooling anytime soon?
I think they're definitely going to cool compared to what we saw the last couple of years. In fact, what we're projecting is maybe a slight increase this year. And then as you go a little further beyond this year, I'm going to stick my neck out here a little bit. As we go a little bit beyond this year, it's really going to depend on how long the net returns stay low. If 24 and 25 and 26 have fairly low net returns, I'm not saying they will, but if they do, then we're going to see some downward pressure on cash rents and land values in 25.
And I know that's also, go ahead, Courtney.
What's your ag barometer? What's that at about right now?
The ag economy barometer, if you look at the land values in the next year, it's at the index is 115, meaning more people think they're going to increase than decrease. We don't ask the percentage increase, but they're still relatively optimistic, and that would be in line with my projections too. Is we're not looking at large increases necessarily, but I think it's still too early to see the land values dip in 24.
So I guess a question I've got, Dr. Langemeier, is, what I'm hearing, land prices haven't cooled as much as people thought with decrease in prices. As I understand it, though, a lot of that's because a lot of the land's still being bought by cash. They're not having to pay higher interest rates. Yeah. So at what stage, how soon does that change to where there's not as much cash that can go into that market and they're going to have to get a loan and start looking at higher interest rates?
That question wasn't set up, but it's almost like it was. Yes, when you look at factors impacting land values, one of them is liquidity. And liquidity is still very strong. The balance sheet for agriculture in general, not everybody necessarily, but in general is very strong, both from the current on the current side and the non-current side. And that'll take about another year, I think, of being fairly strong, and then we'll see some weakening in the balance sheet with lower net returns in 24. But there's many other factors that have also turned from positive to either stable or negative. Interest rates is one of those. Interest rates was a very positive influence on land values for the previous 10 years. It's not now. Interest rates have increased rather dramatically, and so that's why some of the wind has been taken out of the land value market, the land value sales, if you will, is all the factors aren't positive anymore.
I want to pivot right now since we're joined by Representative Culp because many of you have read about House Bill 1183, which is a bill that's, Kendell, you introduced back in January. Tell us a little bit about the bill and where it stands as of right now.
Well, that's pretty fluid as of right now. That's why Senator Lice and I were late tonight. We had a conference committee meeting at 6:25 begin. Unfortunately, I had to dissent on that bill today. So 1183 is the adversarial ownership of farmland bill. Basically, when it left the House, 97-0, it just affected agriculture. So it said if you were one of the adversarial countries as identified by the U.S. government, Department of Commerce, and right now that's Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba, then you would not be permitted to buy a majority interest of farmland in Indiana. That was the bill. That passed very easily. It went to the Senate, and the Senate amended that and put in some military language to protect our military installations in Indiana. And again, that was in Senator Lice's committee. It was amended there. Again, on second reading amendment, so it went to the full Senate, amended to loosen that language a little bit. But what they landed on was it's going to put a 10-mile circle around every military installation in Indiana, including armories, including maintenance facilities, and then the bases that you're more aware of, that 10 miles. And so they put that ring around there, and that was a little different, that those adversaries, and there's just the four main ones, Cuba and Venezuela is not on that list, they could not buy any real estate within that 10-mile radius. Okay, so that means buildings, property, not just farmland, homes, anything. And that sailed through the Senate 49-0, so very, very popular. We found out that there was a provision taken out of that inadvertently in the Senate. That provision would allow if you met that definition of a foreign adversary and you were here in the United States legally, then you could rent residential property. So think of a Purdue student, for example. You're a Chinese student, you come to Purdue, you've got to have housing, right? So we put that exemption in. For whatever reason, inadvertently, that was removed. That's why today we had to go back to conference committee to put that back in. There's a lot of pushback, folks, against that bill if you're in the economic development community. Again, Senator Lice and I met with representatives from the Indiana Economic Development Organization 2.5 weeks ago. And they told us then there were 9 companies that fit the definition of foreign adversary that they currently are working with to locate in Indiana. Senator Lice said, how many of those are Chinese? All 9 of them. Now that's concerning, and that should be concerning to all of you. Now I will say one of those is a corn milling plant. I'm a corn farmer, and it would be an adjacent county to me. Now that's where it gets a little tough. As a Farm Bureau representative, our policy is very clear. We are opposed to foreign adversaries owning Indiana farmland. And so that was very clear within Farm Bureau policy. So the local Farm Bureau wanted that. They've been working on trying to get that corn mill down. This is the same corn milling plant that bought land in North Dakota a year ago that got thrown out because they were close to the Air Force Base. Now they're trying to come to Indiana. So you make up your own mind. I'm not trying to dissuade that. But that's some of the issues as a legislator you run into. You've got to look at the big picture. We had a gentleman came, Brian Cavanaugh, flew in from Washington, D.C. to testify in Senator Lice's Ag Committee. He was on the National Security Council on the Trump administration. And he says there's every reason to be concerned about why these foreign entities are wanting to come in here. These are people, this is communist China, right? This isn't just some Chinese company, right? This is a member, or this is from communist China, and they want to come here, and maybe they want to do good things, but you don't know who the money is behind them. And so if it's the Chinese government, that should be concerning to us. So this has been a very popular bill, not only in Indiana, but there's been 24 states in the last 2 years that have passed legislation to limit some sort of foreign ownership of Indiana or of farmland in their state, and so we're just trying to catch up a little bit. And again, it's been very popular. As I see people, I've got multiple bills moving, but they say, "How's your bill doing?" I know exactly which bill they're talking about. They're talking about the foreign ownership bill. So that's where we're at today. I would say we're in a pretty fragile situation. We hope to adjourn the session by Friday, and so we only have a couple days to get this through. I know a lot of folks, I see Representative Speedy back here, Representative Green and Meltzer, have all told me, and a lot of other legislators, they received several calls just today from farmers asking to concur and to support that legislation. So we'll see as we move forward, but when you get something that passes the House 97-0, passes the House Ag Committee 12-0, passes the Senate Ag Committee 9-0, passes the Senate 49-0, I don't see too many reasons for that bill to stop. And if there is a problem, the governor has veto power, right? And so that's the checks and balances we have in this. If we've missed something, the governor has the right to veto, and then the General Assembly will decide if that happens, if they want to come back.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I want to thank Representative Culp and all of them that have worked on this, because this is really important. Our organization does a lot of policy work. Agribusiness Council is significantly involved in policy. Courtney's got groups representing farmers on the policy side. I just want to say, you know, if you're not part of, say, an ACI or the corn and soybean groups representing your business, whether you're a farm, ag business, whatever, I'd encourage you to do it and pay attention to what's going on. I think, Representative Culp, you and I talked maybe around Thanksgiving, and I think you told me, I'm thinking about doing this, but I don't know that it's going to get any attention. Wasn't this the bill you told me that?
I remember that conversation.
And look, just a few months later, how it's gone. So it's important to be informed and make sure you know who your representatives and your senators are to be able to provide this information, because, as he said, now this bill is really, really important to agriculture in the state of Indiana.
I want to pivot from what Bruce and Kendell said and talk about the importance of ag trade overseas, because Don Lamb, you just returned from a trade mission trip with the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, NASDA for short, which you're a member. Ted McKinney, former ISDA director, in fact, he preceded Bruce in that role. He's the CEO of NASDA. Invited you to join him and other ag leaders to Havana, Cuba, not last week, but the week before. What can you tell us about that trade mission to Cuba, and are there opportunities, in spite of an embargo that's been around since 1959, are there opportunities to trade with Cuba, and are there opportunities for Indiana corn and soybean products, Indiana livestock? I think Ted McKinney told me that they're the #3 buyer of chicken here in the United States, Cuba. What can you tell me about the trip, your takeaways from that trip, Don?
Well, one thing I'd say is these decisions that the legislators have been dealing with are never easy, but here's kind of an ironic part of that. Cuba's on that list. And so at the same time, you know, the week that I go to Cuba to talk about possible trade, we're also talking in our state legislature about not letting them own anything here farmland-wise. And so it gets back to the whole question. These questions are never easy, whether it could be a corn milling plant that gets thrown out and you have to make that scruple decision, or it could be a government that's set up like Cuba, which is really pretty ruthless to its people. But the bottom line is you can fly 90 miles off our coast and there's 11 million people there that are hungry. And so then it kind of gets back to this decision: how do we do this? How do we handle this? You know, we would really like to supply them with food, and but we've got a government that's really tough for us to work with, and they've got some friends that are really hard for us to work with as well. And but the trip, you know, it was one of these trips that just had ups and downs, and I was discouraged by what it would be like to live in a place like that, and I was super thankful to be back. The ration right now for eggs is 5 eggs per person per month. And your basic supplies, you go to the government store and you take your ration card book and you put it out there, and then you get this. And if you have some pesos left over that are worth half what they were 1 year ago, you can go buy some fruits and vegetables at a market and some things like that. So it's things that, honestly, the people there are fairly used to it. So it's not like there's this real big underswell of people who are not satisfied at the moment. But boy, it would drive every one of us completely crazy to live in a situation like that. So the thing that has changed, and the reason we went there, is in 2021 they changed their constitution that allowed really the private sector to play a role in their economy in a much bigger way. And the bottom line is, and you can say it a lot of different ways, but they're injecting a little capitalism into their socialist way of doing business. And that's really what has allowed a lot of this recent activity to happen. And when we come back, it's like, what's our goal? And we met with the president. Anything to do with food in Cuba is a big deal. So when there's 7 states represented in Cuba talking about food, we had a press conference and we left. There was 14 cameras lined up in front of us. And of course, the first question is, can we do anything to get rid of these embargo, the rules that they just say we would have on them unfairly? And we say, no, not from our position, but we're here to build relationships. And in the future, we're just hoping that there's more and more and more doors opened. We do send quite a bit of food to them now. Chicken is a big one. And my goal really is to come up with some product from Indiana. I don't care if it's a pallet, and make a connection with somebody that's involved in that private sector economy, and see if we can send them something, and then build from there. Cuba is not going to be a big market in the real near future. It won't. But there's still 11 million people 90 miles off our coast that need food. So you got to build that relationship up for the future.
I know the overall goal of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, Bruce, the Agribusiness Council of Indiana, Courtney with Indiana Corn Marketing Council, and Indiana Soybean Alliance overall is to grow the value of the products, the ag products that are produced and right here in Shelby County, all across the region. And Courtney, I know that as the CEO of the checkoff organizations for both corn and soybeans, tell me a little bit about, or if you could talk about the reinvestment, the payment into the checkoff program, and some of the successes that the checkoff program has in turn brought about.
Yeah, so checkoff, as you guys know, it's fully farmer funded, farmer managed. The number one question I get is, well, how much are the board of directors paid? Not a penny. Every single board of directors elected from you guys as farmer leaders, and they are not paid to be on the checkoff board. We're coming up to our March board meetings in which they make the decisions of how your checkoff investments are going to get reinvested back in the projects. And consistently, time and time and time again, they put about 50% of that project money into market development work. And they call that market development. They define that as moving the pile. And the work for that is around livestock, biofuels, and exports. You're talking about Cuba, talking about China. When you guys are walking your fields, especially your soybean fields, 2 out of every 3 of those fields get exported out of Indiana and out of the United States in some way. So that could be whole soybeans, that could be soybean oil, that could be soybean meal, or in the form of pork, poultry, duck products that are exported here out of Indiana. So 50% of the checkoff gets reinvested back into developing those international markets, market development work. Jim Douglas, you just came back from Indonesia, meeting with buyers of soybeans in Indonesia who make tofu and tempeh out of it. So there's soybeans going directly from Indiana to Indonesia that gets turned into tofu and tempeh that they eat every meal, every day. Mike Caney, around the corner. Mike has met with buyers in Indonesia, or excuse me, in Vietnam and Korea. Again, they buy soybeans directly from Indiana farmers via containers into that market directly for their consumption. Chris, you were in Dubai meeting with poultry buyers in Dubai and the Middle East at the Gulf Food Show. And when we take those farmers on those trips, and when those farmers go to represent you guys on those trips, they always ask about what's the sustainability? What are you doing for cover crops? How are you growing it? How are your beans clean? Is your corn clean? So they want to know, right? These aren't people who grew up on farms who know how corn and soybeans are grown. They want to hear from the farmers firsthand, what are the practices you use? How do you do it? And then our goal is to make those connections, to bring those Indiana companies along, to bring some of the ACI members along, make those connections of then drawing that straight line of increasing exports of corn, soybeans. We call it corn and soybeans in all forms. So that could be fuel, that could be meal, that could be meat, going to that. And a great story, personal story, you talked about my family in White County. I was meeting with some buyers in China, and they were going to be looking at buying this corn product to go into children's milk that goes into the school milk for children in China, and it's a nutrition health product. And they said, oh, but where does this corn come from? You know, there's this perception that it's these big corporate farmers and these big corporations growing these corn and soybeans in the United States. And I said, I can take you to the field that my family has owned, that some of this corn comes from, that goes into this corn ingredient that's going to go into this milk to feed these children in China and milk. And so that's this global economy and those exports that we're talking about. So that's some of the biggest chunk of the work that the checkoffs do is in market development. As I said, about half the budget goes towards that work in that area.
Well, and Pore Shield, which is a product that is used for cement, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so in addition to that, so that's the big, we call it moving the pile. We've got a whole nother set of work that we call it value creation. So this is small volume, but really big value stuff. So Pore Shield is one of that. So hold on, I've got to check my notes. My team gave me my specific statistic here, so I don't get misquoted here. It's for every 200 bushels of soybeans per 2-lane mile highway. So it's a concrete protectant. Spray it on with a backpack sprayer. It can protect the concrete for up to 10 years. And it is being used by NDOT. It actually was created with Purdue. So Indiana Department of Transportation said we need something that will protect all of this infrastructure that's going in. Worked with Purdue to develop it. They found out that soybean oil is the magic ingredient that makes this work. So ISA funded this, due on that. Skechers tennis shoes, if any of you guys are fans of Skechers tennis shoes, they use soybean oil in the soles of Skechers tennis shoes. In each pair of tennis shoes, it's the equivalent of 3 pounds of soybeans. I was in Italy on vacation. There's a Skechers store, I kid you not, with these tennis shoes and a picture of soybeans next to the Skechers in Italy, of all things. And that's all through the checkoff dollars of investing in some of these emerging new products. You know, when you think about ethanol wasn't always the big ethanol. So our farmers always ask when they look at these projects, what's going to be the next ethanol? What's going to be the next ethanol? And that's what these new uses, emerging markets are going to be.
I'm glad you mentioned ethanol because I want to give a shout out to Poet. Round of applause. Who's here from Poet here this evening? Where are the Poet folks? Right over here? How about, there we go. A round of applause for Poet. How about the folks from Bunge in Morristown? Where are the Bunge folks at? Right here? Representing, how about Fisher's Food Grade Service? Fisher's, are they here? In the back? So we have 3 big companies represented here in Shelby County.
And you mentioned Bunge, if I can jump in. One of
Yes.
the biggest projects that Checkoff has had, and Bunge are great partners on this, high oleic soybeans. High oleic soybeans, Plenish soybeans, Checkoff dollars help to develop that, grow those markets. It has returned $100 million in premiums to Indiana farmers just this past year. $100 million in premiums. So hands down, high oleic soybeans have been the biggest program and project that Checkoff has helped to support to put dollars directly back into farmers' pockets.
I'll open this up to the entire panel because I gave those shout outs to Poet and Bunge and Fishers because Shelby County, we're competing against Hancock County, Boone County, all the surrounding, Johnson County, to attract ag businesses here locally. What can be done to bring even more ag businesses, maybe not just exclusively to Shelby County, but to Indiana? And I'll open it up to the panel.
Indiana's got a really great environment for the ag biosciences, for one thing. And so if you just think about Purdue, and then you think about Corteva, and you think about Elanco, and you think about all the things that Mitch Frazier talks about incessantly at Agrinovus, which is really a great thing. Part of it is just making sure we're telling that story all the time. As far as ag companies coming here, there really isn't a better spot in the world to be than right in Indiana for an ag company. We're in the breadbasket, and just so many great resources here for us. So ag business economy, so it's really just telling the story. It's being confident that we are the right place, and then any chance you get, you can promote Indiana as a great place to be.
Bruce?
Yeah, one of the things I found when I was at ISDA is, I think, trying to encourage farmers and businesses to get to know their local economic development folks, whoever that might be, not to mention the regional and even at the state level. One of the roles that the director at ISDA has is that connection to Indiana Economic Development Corporation from an ag standpoint. But if you folks don't know your economic development professionals in your local areas, get to know them, share your story, whether you're a farmer, whether you're an ag business. Very often I find it's a lot like people in the chamber. They think of businesses as the restaurant in town, the bank in town, the service station in town. They don't think of farms or even, some of our members in retail and grain facilities and that as businesses. They're agriculture, but they don't think of them as businesses. Help them understand the importance of this industry in their local communities and what might be able to come into that county to be able to make it work. Shelby County, I know there's Shelby County is a good example of, you've got some economic development folks that understand agriculture and know the importance.
Yeah, and I would echo that. There was a recent study that put out, and it looked at economic development projects going into agriculture, and they looked across the Midwest. I'm embarrassed to say Indiana was at the bottom of that list. We were at the very bottom of that list. Kentucky has more ag products than we do. Ohio, Illinois, Michigan has more ag projects in the economic development stage than we do. So that tells me ag is not getting their fair share of economic dollars, attention, energy, excitement around it. So I completely echo what you say, Bruce. Get to know your local economic development people. Get to know the folks in your Chamber of Commerce. Get involved with your Chamber of Commerce. They always need volunteers. Get involved with those groups. Get to know who they are, to make sure that ag, that you guys, that all of us, we are getting our fair share of that, because right now we are not.
Kendell?
Yeah, very good advice. Many times locally, agriculture gets overlooked because we're taken for granted, or they might have a token member on the local Lido board or on the Chamber of Commerce. I've seen that in my own community. But you've got to think about Indiana, 38th in size, but top 10 of an agricultural producing state. Why? There's a lot of good reasons. For one reason, we have a great business climate in Indiana to do business. Low regulation state, that's really important. Really fairly low taxes, especially if you look to our neighbors on either side, definitely lower property taxes, lowering income tax. Those are all important attractions for business and entities to come. Now that being said, we all in agriculture, we've got to have economic development to support our industry, our farms, our businesses. But we also need to be concerned about protecting our farmland as well. And there's no better example in how not to do that than driving up and down 74 and seeing all the warehouses, for example, that are going up, and why. And those are not the best places to put those. Now I know Hancock County, for example, has a comprehensive plan, and they're trying to stick to that, and so they're trying to preserve the eastern side of their county and developing the western side. That's great to have that planning. But we need to be very intentional about preserving our most productive farmland for its best use, and that's to produce food.
Dr. Langemeier, any thoughts?
Yes, I want to talk a little bit about to the young people in the audience. There are some fantastic careers, not only in production agriculture, but also agribusiness, also to be attorneys that specialize in agriculture, to be a CPA that specializes in agriculture. We need smart people in this industry. We already have a lot of people, but I want to see that pipeline continue. One of my favorite activities at Purdue on a daily basis is to interact with students, because there's so many brilliant young people going through Purdue and other land-grant universities like Purdue. We need to keep that going. so we maintain this knowledge in production agriculture, because one of the challenges that we face worldwide is to continue to increase production. In order to reduce hunger. We've done a fabulous job reducing world hunger in the last 30 years. We want that to continue. But also countries that want to eat more protein. We need to produce more corn, more soybeans, and ship that corn and soybeans to those countries so they can have more protein in their diet. And so that's kind of my take on that question.
I'm glad you brought up the youth and FFA and the future of Indiana agriculture, because we have Morristown and Waldron FFA here, Southwestern FFA here, Triton Central, Shelbyville FFA. So a lot of young students wearing those blue corduroy jackets, and they've been taking diligent notes throughout, word by word, by everything you've been saying here tonight. And I'll ask, and by the way, Bruce Kettler, not to put you on the spot, former national FFA officer, going back, if I'm not mistaken, 1982 and 1983, is that right?
Yeah, I was 5.
Child prodigy. You were the youngest officer ever in history.
Yes, I'm proud to say that I was.
Which, by the
Absolutely.
way, I'm going to embarrass you even further. While you were a national FFA officer out of Ohio at the time, you met President Reagan not once but twice as an FFA officer. Shook his hand. We're in the Rose Garden with the gentleman. And so you can Google Ronald Reagan, Bruce Kettler, and you'll find a video that Hoosier Ag Today we found on YouTube of you and President Reagan in July of 1983. So be sure to check that out whenever you get the chance. But I'll start with, since Dr. Langemeier, you talked about the future of Indiana agriculture, and I'll go back down this way. Representative Culp, in terms of the FFA members who are here, what message do you have for that next generation of farmers and ag business leaders?
Well, I'm very passionate about FFA specifically, grew up in that as well, and welcome them when I see them at the State House and appreciate their involvement. I'm on a 3-generation farm myself. My father's 88, still at the farm every day, feeds cattle and helps with the farming operation. Actually, my grandson was just born, so he's on the farm as well, and my son farms with us. So generations, families are important, generations are important. But I would say to you young folks, you have a world of opportunities ahead of you in agriculture. Whether you stay in Indiana or whether you go elsewhere, it's really fascinating. And if you do some traveling, as Courtney said, I was on the Indiana Soybean Board and on the American Soybean Board, got to do some traveling and to see what we have here. And sometimes you don't realize it until you go somewhere where they don't have that. It's really amazing, and I think we just get complacent sometimes, and we look around us in our area and think, well, this is my future, and it can be, but it can be greater. But let me tell you, from a industry standpoint and from a government standpoint, I will tell you, in Indiana, our agriculture bench is not very deep. It has got to be stronger. And look at your county. Look at your extension board, your 4-H council, your Farm Bureau board. You see a lot of the same people, or you rotate from one board to the other with the same folks. We have got to improve upon that, and we've got to do better than that. I mean, think about the Indiana General Assembly. I'm the only full-time farmer out of 150, the only one. Now, we have lots of legislators that are very sympathetic to agriculture. They live in a rural area, maybe live on a farm. For example, Senator Lysing, she farmed before she retired. I assume you still own your family farm. And we have lots of that. Our chairman of our House Ag Committee, Representative Aylesworth, same way. He's a retired farmer, still owns a family farm. But it makes a difference if you're involved daily with that. And so there are just so many opportunities to be involved. And we're such a small percentage of the population, but we are such an important part of the population, because we all talk about raising the food for folks to eat, but think about the energy we're producing on our farms. And sometimes that can be very emotional issue and controversial, but we're growing a lot of energy on our farms today. And so we look about what's going to be in the future. We don't always know what's going to be in the future, but we know folks are going to need energy and folks are going to need food, and that has to come from us. So I would just encourage you to stay involved, to get involved, whether it's local or beyond, because there is a place for you in agriculture.
Courtney, do you have any words of wisdom?
I always say that the ag table's big enough for all of us. You know, we've been sitting here, we've been having a great meal together tonight, great conversation tonight, and the table's big enough for all of us. If you enjoy finance, if you enjoy supply chain, if you enjoy accounting, if you enjoy technology, if you, the young man who got the scholarship, diesel mechanics, whatever it is, you know, I was watching some of the spray applicators for the IV tech. Whatever it is, the table is big enough for all of us. So, you know, I would say to the young people around the room, if you've got friends and they say, oh, I want to do finance, or I want to do business, I want to do marketing, I want to do communications, you can do all of those things in agriculture. You know, you guys may have heard me say it before, I'm a little bit of an accidental Aggie, even though my family has a farm. It was never my intention to go into agriculture. I went to business and I was an economics major. Well, what do you think ag is? It's business and economics. So there's room for all of us, no matter what your interests or your passions are.
Well, I'm extremely biased when it comes to the FFA because I'm a product of the organization. And I'll say to all the FFA members here and parents and grandparents that maybe can influence that decision, please make sure that if it's in your school system that those students look at it for several reasons. First and foremost, I think, as has been mentioned, Dr. Langemeier mentioned first, it doesn't matter what you want to do in agriculture, what your interests are. If you're in FFA, there's a place for you to have that understanding, have that background, make sure it happens. The other thing I'll say is that, you know, for these young people now in this industry, and I think every generation feels this way in agriculture, but there's not a better time. But when you start to look at technology and, you know, robots and autonomy and what that can mean for our industry, we talked about labor and those concerns. Man, these young people are really, really good at that. And what the FFA and ag education does is it gives them the opportunity for that entrepreneurial spirit to be honed, whether it's in a career development event or whether they've got projects that they're working on. They really have that understanding, and the door is wide open in this industry to be able to use that creativity however they do it. The other part that very often goes overlooked, I think, but those of us that are deeply involved and understand the FFA organization real well, it sets you up for a lot of things that other classes in school can't and won't. And that's when it comes to leadership development. Learning how to properly conduct a meeting, learning how to work as part of an officer team or a committee. Some people call them power, you know, this opportunity, our young people don't get a lot of that anymore, and the FFA is setting itself apart for that leadership development opportunity. And the other thing I'll say is you build some lifelong friendships and people that do that. In fact, there's a young man here this evening that was also a national FFA officer in Ohio. We grew up literally about 4 miles apart on the same side of the same road, different school systems, who was also a national officer several years after me. But we're lifelong friends because we have that connection and have been involved. And so that connection can be really strong, and you can start it at a young age.
Don?
I was not in the FFA, and but the FFA is part of the Department of Agriculture now, so I'm becoming a lot more educated on what FFA does. The reason I wasn't is I was talking with my comms department one day about some points I was going to make at an FFA discussion. I said, well, they didn't have FFA at Lebanon High School when I was there. She goes, oh, they didn't have it back in the 70s. And I said, or the 80s when I was there. And but it is interesting though when you think about the way FFA has happened. At Lebanon High School, FFA went away because there wasn't that much farming community the way it was perceived at that time. But FFA changed itself enough that so many other things became a part of agriculture, and they moved that into their curriculum, that Lebanon has a strong FFA now. So it's, you know, you think it might be going the other way, but it got better at Lebanon. So I always wish I could have been in the FFA. So, and the thing I would tell the young folks here, I like to use the word Team Ag Indiana. I can tell you, it has been 1 year now. It was at this event 1 year ago that I took this job, and I'm still going to key Bruce's car when I leave here for leaving. But
You're an upgrade. Believe me, you're an upgrade.
in that 1 year, the biggest thing I've learned is perspective. And one thing I will tell you, if you have an opportunity to farm, or if you're a farmer in the room, farmers are very special. Very special. And the way I can say that is because I've been able to step out of that for a year. I still talk to my brother about every day and kind of think about the things that are going on. And his day is almost always a lot harder than mine. And the liability that farms carry and the amount of people management that farms do and the decisions that they make and the dollars that they handle, farmers are really special people. And I couldn't really say that when you're part of it. If you're sitting out there thinking you're a farmer, you may not think about that. But now I can honestly tell you that, and I'm not bragging when I say that because I'm talking about my brother. And so if you have an opportunity to farm, that's great. The other side of the perspective, though, as I've seen, is whether it's ACI or corn soybean or being part of the state legislature, or Purdue, or there's so many places that agriculture is a really great place to work as well. And the people who support the farmers are incredible. And very few of them do it just for the paycheck. Almost everybody that's involved in agriculture does it because they love agriculture for some reason, and they go way above and beyond. So, now I get to work with a bunch of people who still go way above and beyond for agriculture. So Team Ag Indiana is really, really strong, and it's a really cool place to be. And as you think about what you want to do in the future, wherever you can fit in, it'll be a great future.
So Kendell, on that, Kendell said it, and then we were talking about we punch above our weight in Indiana. And I think one big reason for that is because of Team Ag Indiana, that as Don said, we come together, and because of that becomes that multiplier. So, we're number 4 or 5 corn soybeans, we're number 1, 2 in eggs, number 1 in duck, we're in the top 5 in pork, top 5 in poultry usually.
1 in popcorn.
1 in popcorn.
Don produces popcorn, by the way, so he
Tomatoes, we're number 1 or 2 in tomatoes, cantaloupe. I mean, you go down the list, right? Peppermint, we punch above our weight, given how we are, because we work together, because we're all sitting up here together. And I will also give a shout out to the Ag Barometer. When I go and talk to my colleagues, the corn and soybean execs from the other states, they all say to me, what's the Ag Barometer say? Do I get signed up for the Ag Barometer? How do I get signed up for the Ag Barometer? Because that, easy to understand, it gives the pulse of agriculture. So even, they see that as a leadership piece.
I will ask this of the entire panel. We talk about the youth of the future, I should say, of Indiana agriculture, but is it concerning to the 5 of you when you read, according to the U.S. Census of Agriculture that was released about 2 weeks ago, the average age of the farmer here in Indiana is 56. 56 years old, the average age. That's the average age of the American farmer. So there are a lot of men and women who are still farming into their 60s, their 70s, some even into their 80s. And I'm not looking specifically at you, Jim Douglas, I apologize. But
Birthday boy over there.
Mr. Birthday Boy, he's 39 anyway. Is it concerning to any of the 5 of you when you read that?
I would just say I'm 57, so I'm average. I'm a little above average. And
I thought you were 29.
Yeah. But the thing that I think is exciting that I've been able to see is there's so many different aspects to agriculture now that in a way it bothers me because you can see consolidation, you can see things getting bigger, you kind of wonder how this is going to work out. But boy, there's a lot of opportunities in so many other areas now, and we might say it's small farm type stuff. It's really not so small, but it's direct to consumer agriculture is huge. The way we're being creative with raising cattle and processing them ourselves and selling them locally, and the local food thing is not a fad. The local food thing is very real, and so what part you want to play in that can be really exciting. So, I mean, yes, it concerns me on one side, but boy, we've always adapted very well, and young people will continue. If they want to be involved in agriculture, they'll make it happen.
Any other thoughts, Dr. Langemeier?
The average age has been 56, 57, 58 for a long time. And I want to note that, but the bench is deep. I work with a lot of students that would like to go back to farm, don't necessarily have that opportunity. And so there's some good people out there that are coming back to the farm, so I'm not worried. We've got some people coming up that are going to get the job done. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, including my nephew. He's in Nebraska, but my nephew is coming back, and he's the 6th generation. So we're very proud of him in Nebraska.
Farm succession. Oh, by the way, go ahead, Kendell.
Yeah, I'll weigh in on that. First of all, Dr. Langemeier, just watch out next year in the General Assembly. There might just be a bill about encouraging those young folks to come back and take over farms and team up with the retiring farmers. We've got some thoughts going there. But I agree with Don. Our ag folks, whether they're young, old, middle-aged, whatever, they're very innovative and entrepreneurial. And they're figuring out how they can find their niche and get involved in ag. Back when I was younger, really, if that next generation needed to come back, and interest rates were high in the 80s and land prices were going up, and it was really hard to get and to dig in and get your foothold in that. And so a lot of those cases, they got in through livestock. They'd build a quad barn, and maybe they hadn't raised hogs before, but that was a way to bring that next generation back. Now it is about local foods and innovative ways, and agritourism, for example, is another great way that we're bringing that next generation back. And they get out of Purdue, for example, and they want to come back to the family farm. It's not quite big enough, don't quite have enough acres, and so what can we do? And you get those bright minds working, and they come up with some great solutions. So I'm really excited about the future, and I kind of agree. I think that average age is going to kind of stay right there in the mid to upper 50s.
Well, and we're also seeing, as you mentioned, Dr. Langemeier, precision agriculture, drones being used, satellites being used to scout fields. So the sky's the limit when it comes to technology. And we're seeing, in fact, there's a company that I did a news story on in Commodity Classic, a company that they have Purdue grads. It's called Sweetwater Technologies, and they're looking for partner owner operators to grow their drone spraying operation across not just Indiana, but across the Midwest. And so many digital platforms that are being created. So you have to be encouraged when you see the ag innovation that's coming about because of the younger generation.
Yeah, I guess I'm the same way. I'm not worried about that average age. I'm glad you said that, Dr. Langemeier, because I bet if you went back to the census, it's been that pretty close for, I don't know, maybe 100 years for all I know. But I think you're right. I think it's finding ways to continue to innovate, and that's where we can set ourselves apart in this state with the people. You look at these platforms, ag tech platforms. Indiana has got a lot of those folks looking for a lot of reasons, whether it's the educational piece or the people, the business environment. There's a lot of reason for those companies to be here. And that's where just being able to know who your neighbors are, knowing that we can have the cooperation, whether it comes clear from the legislature to the businesses to the farms. This state is really good at that. I agree with Courtney. I'm concerned about some things too when it comes to economic development. But again, that's why we've got to go out there and get involved. We've got to make sure people know who we are. I got so frustrated when I would talk to chamber folks and I would say, tell me about the businesses in your community. And like I said, they talk about restaurants and banks and so forth. And you'd say, the hospital, what about the farm? Well, yeah, it's just a farm. Well, it's not just a farm. If you know and understand, I mean, think of the capital it would take to, let's just say, a 500-acre farm if you had to start from scratch. The capital it would take would be way more capital than probably most all of those businesses in town that you have to get started. And so we need to be able to hold up our hands, say here's what we're doing, here's why we're proud of it, and that we're in a great environment in this state to be able to make it happen.
One of the projects, or two of the projects on the checkoff side of things that I'm really proud about that we work on, one of them is called the Producer-Led Innovation Challenge. And so it is the farmers, along with Farm Bureau, Indiana Corn, Indiana Soybeans, identifies what's a need in the marketplace, what's the need that farmers have. And then working with our partners at Agribusiness to go out and pull in technology companies to help solve that need. And then think of it almost like a Shark Tank, that they kind of do a pitch to the farmers, and then the farmers pick who the winner is going to be. So it creates these opportunities of this connection of a need to these technology companies who maybe haven't worked in technology before. The other one, when you talk about the upcoming students, the Purdue Student New Uses Competition, Soybean New Uses Competition, it's now in its 30 years, 40 years old now, 30 years old. 40 students go through that about a year of every department, every school of what are innovative new uses on soybeans. So when you get that kind of creative, fresh ideas from the students, it's amazing what comes out of some of that work. So we've got creative ideas flowing.
So we have these 5 panelists here. I'm going to walk into the audience. Does anybody, raise their hand, have a question for any of the 5 panelists? I know we've covered a lot of topics. I know, what is it, 9 o'clock now, according to my watch? I know it's a school night. Does anybody have any questions for the panel, our Indiana Ag All-Star panel? No one has any question? Eric Pfeiffer, you must have a question with Hoosier Ag Today. No, he's like, I'm ready to go home. How about this? You can find this particular chat. We're going to post it on YouTube, thanks to the folks here at Horseshoe Indianapolis Racing and Casino. We're going to post it on YouTube. We're going to share it at HoosierAgToday.com. Be sure to like us on Facebook, Twitter, or X now, I guess is what it's called. LinkedIn, also the Shelby County Ag promotion page. We'll share it there as well. Once again, a big round of applause. Let me introduce him one final time. Don Lamb, Director of Indiana State Department of Agriculture. Bruce Kettler, the Director, or I should say the CEO of Agribusiness Council of Indiana. Courtney Kingery, the CEO of the Indiana Corn Marketing Council, Indiana Corn Growers Association, Indiana Soybean Alliance. Representative Kendell Culp, Vice President of Indiana Farm Bureau and State Representative for District 16. And of course, Dr. Micheal Langemeier. He's a professor of Purdue Ag Economics and Associate Director of the Purdue Center for Commercial Purdue Agriculture. Let me get that one more time. The Purdue Center for Commercial Agriculture. There we go. And check out the Ag Economy Barometer. Once again, that website, Dr. Langemeier.
You can go to the Center for Commercial Agriculture in the search engine.
Just Google Purdue Center for Commercial Agriculture. About the first of the month is when, well, about the first week of the month. First Tuesday of every month is when you can find that survey that he and his team at Purdue release. Once again, a big round of applause for our Indiana Ag All-Star panel.